Shabbat Shalom. If you will humor me for a second, if you'll take each of your hands and make a gentle fist, just a gentle fist. Now in your left hand, I invite you to imagine that you have a beautiful flower. Whatever your favorite kind of flower, imagine that in your left hand, a beautiful flower, and just take a little smell. And in your right hand, I invite you to imagine that you have a birthday candle, just a birthday candle, and now blow out the candle. Now in your left hand, I'll invite you to imagine you have not just one flower, but an entire bouquet of your favorite flowers. Take a deep smell of that entire bouquet of your favorite flowers. And in your right hand, imagine not that you have one birthday candle, but you've got a whole set of candles in your hand, and you need to blow out all of the candles. So blow them all out. Now again, we're going to go back to the beginning. One flower, one candle. Ready? Now a whole bouquet and a whole bundle of candles. Again, one flower, one candle. A whole bouquet and a whole bunch of candles. Now you can put your hands down. What you just did is a breathing exercise that they teach to Israeli children when they're hiding in bomb shelters, to keep them calm, to help them breathe through their stress and their anxiety and their fear. One flower, one candle. One bouquet, a bunch of candles. Over and over again. This is what our brothers and sisters have been teaching in bomb shelters in Sderot and Ashdod and Ashkelon for years because of the thousands of missiles that Gaza has fired at them. But we want our children to learn about our commitment to life and to love. That's what we teach them, right? So they have to learn to deal with the difficult moments because we teach them that too. That's what our brothers and sisters in Israel have been teaching their kids for years. How to breathe, how to cope, how to love life, and how to preserve life. I've been thinking a lot over this last month about what it is we teach our children. What is it that the kids in Israel are learning right now? What are the lessons they're taking away? And I think too, of course, about what the lessons that the Palestinian children in Gaza are learning. And what lessons are they taking away? Because this war will not just be with us for the next few weeks and not just with us for the next few months. This war will impact a generation. And as we well know, trauma impacts not just one generation, but multiple generations. What is it that we're teaching our children? I want to invite you to consider that question as we think about the world around us, and there's been lots of talk about the college campuses and how pro-Palestinian has actually become anti-Semitism. Because to some extent, we've even taught our own kids the blessings of compassion, and compassion is important, and we need to be teaching our children compassion. But because we've so overdone this teaching of compassion, and yes, a rabbi is saying we've even overdone this teaching of compassion, that it's led to this woke culture in which binaries exist between oppressor and oppressed, between colonizer and those being colonized. And they create these false binaries and they perpetuate these myths. And our kids don't know how to think it through because we haven't really been teaching them to think critically. We haven't been teaching them to read every headline with a grain of salt. We haven't been teaching them how to turn off social media and how to really read news. What are we teaching our kids? And I think about what we're teaching our kids right now, how we are responding to the war on terror, to the war against Hamas. Not in Israel, not in Gaza. I'm thinking about what we're teaching our children and our grandchildren. Our anxiety, our fear, our resilience, our strength, our hopes and our dreams, our anger and our sadness. What is it that we are teaching our children and our grandchildren? And I invite you to keep that question in mind as we turn now to our Torah portion this week, Parashat Va-yera. Just last week we read about God choosing Avram Avinu. God chose Abraham and Sarah, but we don't really know why God chose Abraham. Who was Abraham? That God would pick him of all the people to combat the Hamas. Yes, that's the word the Torah uses. The Hamas, the lawlessness, the chaos, the violence that existed in ancient times. And God chose that man, Abraham, to be the one to reject it, to be the one to combat it. God, last week in our Torah, told us that Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and through Jacob would be the antidote to evil in the world. But how would we be the antidote to evil? And why Abraham? So as we turn to our Torah portion this week, Parashat Va-yera, I'll invite you to turn with me to page 103 in our Eitz Chaim Chumashim, page 103. And here we come to the famous story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know that God comes down and actually tells Abraham that God is going to destroy Sodom and Amorah, these two cities. And God says, I'm just going to wipe them off the face of the earth with fire and with brimstone. And what is it that Abraham says? And here we're at the top of page 103. Abraham came forward and said to God, this is chutzpah. Abraham came forward and said to God, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe them out the place and not forgive it for the sake of an innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. And then in perhaps the most chutzpahdik, the most challenging of verses in our entire Torah, Abraham says to God, Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat? Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? This is perhaps the most challenging text in the entire Torah for what we are watching happening right now in Israel. Abraham says to God, you're going to destroy those cities? What about the innocent people? What about the innocent people? And God says, fine, Abraham, if you find 50 people, 50 innocent people in that city, I won't destroy it. And Abraham says to God, what about 40? And God says, fine, you find 40, I won't destroy it. And Abraham says, okay, God, what about 30? God says, fine, you find 30, I won't destroy it. Abraham says, how about 20? Find 20 righteous people. And God says, fine, you find 20 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. And then Abraham says to God, what about 10 righteous people? Will you spare the city for 10 righteous people? How many Jews make up a minyan? Will you spare the city for even 10 righteous people? And God says, fine. You find 10 righteous people, and I'll spare the city. It's a challenging text right now, my friends. It is a challenging text. What's the next thing that happens, by the way? They don't find 10 righteous people. God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham calls on God to be more compassionate. And God responds by saying yes. And sometimes we also have to enact justice. Abraham calls on God to be more compassionate. And God says yes. but sometimes we also have to enact justice. For 2,000 years, we Jews have been a homeless people, dreaming about the promised land, dreaming about our home in Israel, but unable to be there and unable to be in control of our own destinies. We've been wandering and we've been wondering. We've been abused and oppressed, kicked out, tortured, murdered for 2,000 years. The pursuit of justice has been something we didn't think we could ever achieve or see in our times. But we could practice compassion. And so the Talmud, actually, in an interesting commentary on these verses, actually comes to say that the mark of our nation, the mark of the Jewish people, is that they are a people committed to compassion, to humility, and to performing acts of loving kindness. Because when you have no power, that's exactly what you can do for each other, with each other. You can be compassionate, and you can be humble, and you can be kind, because there's not much else you can do. You can tell a lot about a people by what they teach their children. And as we look around at the different nations of the world, and we look around at the different peoples with whom we interact, and we even look around at our own values, you can tell a lot about a people by what they're teaching their children. The mark of a nation, the Talmud tells us, the mark of our nation, is that we're committed to compassion, to humility, and to performing acts of loving kindness. But if we go back before the Talmud, before the time we were powerless, and we look to a time where maybe we had a little bit of strength, maybe we had a little bit of power, and we come to Abraham, our patriarch. And so I'll invite you to open up your Chumashim again. And here I'm on page 102, the verses just before the verses we read. And here in verse 17, chapter 18, verse 17, page 102, God decides he's going to tell Abraham about God's plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So God says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I, God, have singled Abraham out, that he may instruct his children, that he should teach his children, and his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren, to keep the way of the Lord by doing tzedakah umishpat." And I'll take issue here with the translation. Tzedakah umishpat. Righteousness and law, perhaps even better, compassion and justice. Herein, the Torah tells us exactly why God chose Abraham in the verses we read last week. Because Abraham is a man who's going to teach his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren about compassion, yes, and also justice. There is evil in this world. And when we can, we have an obligation to remove evil from this world. But we also have to be compassionate. We have to be compassionate. And we have to struggle to find the balance between the two. And as we know, balance doesn't always mean 50-50. Sometimes balance can be this way, and sometimes it can be that way. But we have to try to find that balance between compassion and justice. What is it that we're teaching our children and grandchildren? I grew up in an amazing home. My parents, first and foremost, taught me about the importance of education. Right? That's the first thing that Jewish kids learn, the importance of education. But I also grew up in a home where the Holocaust was something we spoke about regularly. I grew up knowing and learning what it means to be alone. what it means to be without power when there's no one to stand up and defend us or protect us. I also learned on the other side, the grandchild of Chassidim, what it means to be joyful. Despite those fears and despite that angst and despite that potential for suffering, I learned what it means to be joyful and to celebrate my Judaism and to come to the synagogue each and every week. And not only did I learn the value of education, not only did I learn the lessons of the Holocaust, not only did I learn the beauty of Judaism, but my parents also raised me in a synagogue community where I could find my best friends and where I could find another family, another Jewish family, who would love me and raise me as their own. And in that way, I learned that despite the Holocaust, as long as there are Jews, we're never alone. We have each other. We have each other. Now, there are a lot of references in our social media feeds, even in our conversations, to the 1930s Germany. Sometimes what we're hearing, it feels that way. And certainly when we hear the chant from the river to the sea, don't be confused. It's not a message of compassion for the Palestinian people. That is a message of genocide. But this is not 1930s Germany. We have power. We have a Jewish army. We can pursue justice in addition to offering compassion. And we have an obligation to pursue justice in addition to offering compassion. But I also want to remind us that we're not alone. Now, Father Chris, I had already planned this in my message for today. You being here reminds all of us that we're not alone because we have each other as Jews, but there are truly good and decent human beings in this world. Faith leaders willing to stand up to say what is right and what is wrong. Thank you for being here. To the Levies and to the Levies, thank you for being here for me. To each and every one of you, thank you for being here for me and for being here with each other. What is it that we teach our children and grandchildren? Education, yes. Vulnerability, yes. Jewish joy, absolutely. And we have to do a better job of it. We teach them that as long as they're part of the Jewish people, they're never alone. We teach them to go out and find good and decent people that they can call their friends who are non-Jews as well. And we teach them that there's a time for compassion. And we also teach them that there's a time for justice. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless each and every one of us with strength, with discernment, and may God bless us all with peace. And we say together, Amen.